Licht's entire party has been wiped out by a ravaging badger mole, and he is the only one left standing. He is careful to make as little movement as possible to use his signature skill, Resurrection, to revive his entire party. Your duty is not over, Samurai. His party springs to life, and with their second wind, they defeat the badger mole with relative ease. On the way home, Licht's party, consisting of Shizuku, Alan, and Joss, split up the large bounty money evenly amongst themselves. When Shizuku hands Licht his share, she gives him a happy pat on the back, crediting him for their party's recent staggering success. Thanks to his resurrection spell with visibly no drawbacks, Licht's party can keep rising from the dead to continue fighting. Though Joss remarks that dying doesn't exactly feel pleasant, Shizuku asks Alan if he knew that Licht had such an amazing skill, but he shakes his head and explains that he only recruited him to fill up their party slots. Licht reveals that he didn't want to reveal his resurrection spell to anyone, which Shizuku thinks is a waste, since an ability like his would definitely get him recruited in the S-class parties. However, Licht explains that he was afraid that evil or unscrupulous individuals would take advantage of his completely broken ability, but he has since changed his mind. Alan and the rest of the party have shown that they are kind people, and he is comfortable showing them his skills. His blunt honesty catches them off guard for a moment, and they give him even more hearty pats on the back. Shizuku does admit that she thought he was useless before the resurrection skill, though. However, thanks to him, their dream of becoming S-rank adventurers isn't just a dream anymore. It can be a reality. Alan clasps Licht's shoulder and expresses that he has high hopes for him. Licht is happy to be needed. Days, weeks, and even months pass by. They go on all sorts of adventures, and they eventually become powerful enough to defeat foes without relying on Licht's resurrection skill. They eventually become S-rank adventurers in no time at all. Thanks to Licht's resurrection as a safety net, they can fight with nearly reckless abandon. One day, while celebrating another easy quest, Alan places a sheet of paper on the table for their next one. The quest, which is to investigate a small shrine, seems relatively simple enough. The next day, they head to the Deerlick Shrine, and they are forced to pass through a relatively cramped tunnel. Suddenly, Alan instructs the party to turn back, without accompanying anything. Licht notices that the air seems quiet, and he senses that something is amiss. He should have trusted his instincts. Licht is suddenly betrayed by his party, and he is surrounded by a small battalion of royal soldiers and a priest elder. He holds up a piece of paper, authorizing an execution order for none other than Licht. Soldiers immediately apprehend Licht, who demands to know what wrong he's done. He's done nothing wrong, and if he had a cell phone, he'd film this and post it online for TikTok clout. The elder explains that the problem, and therefore the crime, lies in Licht's skill. Resurrection is certainly a powerful skill that can be used to save people, but he fears that the potential for its misuse is far too dangerous to ignore. Licht thinks this is ridiculous, and he looks to his party members to vouch for his morals and good character, but Alan passes by him without so much as a nod. Alan apologizes, though not sincerely, for having to obey the kingdom's orders. He explains that Licht's resurrection skill was highly valued in the past, when they were unable to fight monsters without dying. But now that they're S-rank adventurers, he sees little value in Licht. In fact, the whole party has been slowly growing dissatisfied, since Licht continues to receive a cut of the loot, despite not actually doing anything. A horrified Licht tries to find solace in Joss and Shizuku, but both of them have already sold him out. They share Alan's dissatisfaction with him. Licht is blindfolded and led to a cliffside, where he is forced to kneel for his execution. The executioner reassures him that it will be a quick and painless death. When he is asked for his last words, Licht replies, "Scumbags." The executioner sneers and threatens to change the execution method into something worse. Licht tells him to hurry up and do it already. The executioner stabs Licht and kicks him off the cliff. Licht falls on the grass, and the executioner walks away. All is still, and all is quiet. The executioner should have double-tapped Licht, but he didn't. This will prove to be a fatal mistake. Licht's resurrection magic activates on himself, and he is brought back from the dead. Licht staggers to his feet, bewildered by what just happened. He knows for sure that he died, but when he tries to find the stat wound, it is already healed. It dawns on him that his resurrection spell works automatically on him too, which is something that neither he nor his party knew about. Licht, betrayed by the party he thought were his friends, has nowhere to go. Unable to return to the Resaga kingdom, he begins wandering through the forest in search of shelter. The light in his eyes has disappeared. this world shall know pain. Licht's betrayal has driven him to the edge, and his revenge story begins. Licht arrives near the sea, at the very edge of the Resaga kingdom. Neither his party nor the kingdom know that he has resurrected, so he decides to flee elsewhere before they do. In this world, demons dominate the land, controlling well over 70% of all territories. Licht has heard whispers of a mysterious dungeon somewhere near the border, and traveling there has become his temporary goal. However, peering over the vast emptiness of the ocean, he realizes it was nothing but a rumor. Out of frustration, he picks up a rock and tosses it toward the water, but he hears a distinctive metal clang sound ring out. He lifts his head and notices what appears to be a fleeting image of a metal door. Licht springs to his feet, and he wades through the rough waters to reach this door. As fate and luck would have it, Licht discovers the very dungeon he's been searching for. He carefully makes his way through the dungeon, which is emptier than my wallet after the recent banner I rolled on. When he reaches the deepest pits of the dungeon, he enacts his grand plan to resurrect every single dead corpse that is buried within. For now, Licht needs allies, hopefully ones that are hot and won't betray him. The dungeon is very ancient, and he hopes to find at least 1 or 2 powerful champions buried within. The irony of using the resurrection as necromancy, just as the priest-elder had feared, is not lost on Licht. He stretches out his hand over the barren room and casts resurrection, and a few moments later the ground erupts. When he looks up, 3 beautiful girls and 2 children arise before him. They celebrate their apparent revival, and they happily reunite with each other. When they finally notice Licht, a girl known as the Demon King glares at him. A bead of sweat trickles down Licht's cheek. The Demon King instructs her retainers to leave the room to ensure that the two aren't disturbed. This can mean 2 things. Either she's about to kill him, or make out with him. She asks Licht how he was able to revive her and her compatriots, even though over 100 years have passed. Only their bones remained, but he somehow managed a feat that not even the best necromancer could have done. Licht tries to explain that he doesn't know much of the details either, which the Demon King finds greatly amusing. She finds Licht quite an interesting find, and she invites him to become one of her comrades. She doesn't care about his circumstances or what led him here. All she knows is that she was revived, and even demons know how to return a favor. He accepts, and just like that, Licht becomes a member of the Demon King's army. He asks for her name, and she introduces herself as Arya, the great and legendary demon lord. Licht introduces himself in kind, and Arya looks forward to introducing him to her 4 other loyal retainers. Licht believes that they must at least be very capable in their own right. Arya's first order of business is to rebuild her great dungeon, Dystopia. 100 years have passed, but the layout of their domain has remained relatively unchanged. She explains that this dungeon goes by another name, Adventurer Killer. It is an uninspired name for sure, but it is deadly accurate. Licht offers his services, but he warns Arya that his combat ability is unremarkably average. She gives him a good slap on the back and reassures him that she won't send him into battle. His resurrection ability is far too valuable to risk. Licht notices that the massive dungeon is only manned by Arya's 4 retainers, hinting that it is severely lacking in manpower. He asks her if she noticed anything different about them, and Arya replies that they used to look more tired and exhausted. It looks like Arya's dungeon isn't just an adventurer killer, it's an employee killer too. Licht suggests that they rethink the strategy behind their stationing, so Arya sends him to discuss this matter with the others. Before he can protest, Arya waves him off and wanders somewhere else. Licht enters the area closest to the boss room, the Hall of Melancholy, staffed by Ferris. She is busily moving to and fro, transferring books from shelf to shelf. Licht eyes Ferris and notices that she doesn't seem human, just like the others. He tells her that he is here to find a way to reduce their workload in defending the dungeon. Ferris bows in deference to him, proclaiming him their savior. She will cooperate to the best of her ability. Licht is shocked to learn that Ferris is in charge of a staggering 5 different areas in this dungeon. Ferris and the others certainly don't look or act like monsters at all, so they are more akin to high-ranking demons than pure bosses. Licht realizes that the lack of manpower is more grave than he thought. Ferris complains that things get really stressful once the enemies arrive. Licht thinks hard about these circumstances, and he feels that their best option for now is to fill the other rooms with traps, because he can hardly fill the gaps with the manpower that they do not have. He is worried that Arya might not accept his proposal, but Ferris reassures him that Arya will listen. Lict's next stop is the primordial forest, staffed by the wrestling tag team duo of Tis, the older sister, and Iris, the younger. They notice Licht approaching, and they stand up to greet him. Tis admits she overheard his earlier conversation with Arya, so they have a vague notion of why he is here. Licht reassures her that he's here to help and ease their burdens, so they decide to hear him out. Licht suggests that the pair split up to cover more ground, but Iris helplessly latches onto her older sister. They refuse to split up, and Tis argues that they work and perform better as a team. Iris suggests that Licht resurrect their servants, mindless puppets that normally performed odd jobs throughout their rooms, but Licht explains that he is unable to resurrect things that do not have a soul. For the time being, Licht decides to think about this a little more. Tis and Arya send him off with a smile. Next, Licht visits the vampire Rose in her aptly named dungeon room, the Batcave. Licht explains that he is investigating the issue of the manpower shortage plaguing the dungeon, and Rose feels a bit bad for having it relatively easier than the rest. When he asks her how many areas she is in charge of, she nonchalantly replies, 7. This is by far the largest workload compared to the others, so Licht suggests that they do something about it. However, Rose insists that she's fine, since her stamina is greater than that of her peers. But if her workload increased anymore, then she might have a problem. Licht tells himself that their only option is to hire more workers, but they can't just hire any ordinary monster. Licht suddenly has a eureka moment. To make a dungeon impenetrable, it is essential for them to muster the manpower to defend it. There is one person who can trivialize this issue, the great and legendary necromancer. Later, Licht accompanies Ferris to the surface, which has changed since her 100-year state of death. There even appears to be a bridge connecting the entrance to the mainland, though this is something that Rose did in her spare time. They notice a large wolf near the other end of the bridge, but Ferris reassures him that it isn't an enemy. It is a wolf that has been charmed into obedience by Rose, presumably as a method of transportation. She urges Licht to get on, and he mounts the great beast. Ferris latches onto his back, and together they head to the thinly guarded grave of the great necromancer. Ferris looks forward to the great boons this will bring to their dungeon if the operation succeeds. However, Ferris wonders if Arya would be willing to accept a necromancer into their ranks, and Licht reassures her that it'll be fine. Arya suddenly asks Licht if he can resurrect the dead an unlimited number of times, and he tells her that it won't be an issue. Arya thinks long and hard about the implications of this. Meanwhile, near the grave of the great necromancer, 2 guards arm themselves after hearing Licht and Ferris approaching. The armed guards, known only as the gravekeepers, anticipate the arrival of what they believe to be simply grave robbers. The punishment that they will dole out is death. Licht and Ferris dismount from the great wolf, and they instruct it to wait for them. They slowly enter the cemetery, but Licht senses danger ahead. The gravekeepers appear from the cover of darkness and strike, but Licht manages to evade them just in time. However, Ferris isn't so lucky. As her stomach is split wide open by a single swing of an axe, she slumps to the ground, and a horrified Licht watches as the light disappears from her eyes. Suddenly, the other guard also writhes in gut-wrenching pain. After a few agonizing moments, he drops dead. The other guard demands to know what happened, and Licht realizes the meaning behind Aurea's earlier words. He raises his hand and brings Ferris back to life, as if nothing happened. He would have appreciated a heads up about her ability. The other guard panics as Ferris slowly approaches him. With an unnerving, bone-chilling laughter, she grabs his knife and slits her own throat, and the 2 of them drop dead. Licht stares at her for a moment before reviving Ferris back to full health. She sits up as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world, and Licht is slightly distressed about this whole thing. Ferris warns him that the pair might have called for reinforcements beforehand, so they hasten their search for the necromancer's tombstone. Ferris and Licht eventually stumble upon the gravestone of the necromancer, Dorothy. Licht casts his resurrection spell over the grave, and a hand adorned with rings suddenly breaks out of the ground. She politely asks for a little help. Licht and Ferris pull her out of the dirt, and Dorothy remarks that she preferred to have been resurrected after they dug up her corpse. In hindsight, that's a great idea, and Licht apologizes for not thinking of it sooner. Dorothy asks why he resurrected her, and he cuts to the chase. He wants her to be their comrade. She glances at Ferris and notices that she isn't human, so she ultimately agrees. However, she has one question for Licht. She can sense that he isn't a necromancer himself, so she'd like to know his resurrection method, especially since there doesn't seem to be a master-slave dynamic going on, which is the usual side effect of raising the dead. Licht explains how his skill, Resurrect, works, and that it can even resurrect himself. Dorothy finds this all fascinating, and she finds that his abilities are remarkably similar to hers. She formally agrees to be his companion, and he suggests that they all leave before the Gravekeeper's reinforcements arrive. Licht, Faris, and Dorothy return to the deepest depths of dystopia. Dorothy is quite amazed by how large the dungeons are. Licht asks if this will be a problem, and Dorothy claims that it won't be a problem. Enslaving people from the dead in great numbers is exactly her forte. Dorothy raises her staff and does a little dance because it's apparently necessary. Licht is surprised that she finished so quickly, and Dorothy explains that her guardian spirits will be heading into every unguarded corner of the dungeon. Dorothy remarks that she never thought she'd end up serving under a demon lord. She asks him how he ended up here, and he explains that he had some issues with the humans. Issues is a massive understatement. Dorothy doesn't exactly know what happened, but she hopes that Licht can find what he's looking for now that he has a second leash on life. Dorothy wants to meet Arya as soon as possible, but Licht explains that the demon lord herself might be sleeping right now. He suggests that she greet the scary-looking demons first, like Faris. Dorothy is surprised that Licht finds Faris scary, but that's only because she didn't see her deal with those Gravekeepers. Nevertheless, Dorothy decides to follow his lead. Meanwhile, back in Rasaga, Alan is visited by Shizuku, who asks him if he's found a replacement for Licht. He replies not yet, pointing out that finding someone at their level is exceedingly difficult. Alan points out the problem. Because they are so high-leveled, finding a healer to match their combat prowess is near impossible. Shizuku is confused. She thought that since Licht was reasonably useful during fights, then other healers would be just as capable. Alan explains that Licht wasn't strictly a healer, resurrection was just a skill of his, so his combat ability was actually respectable. Alan clicks his tongue. For the time being, he decides to accept anyone willing to join them as a decoy. Shizuku doesn't mind abandoning them when the going gets tough either. They have lots of applicants after all. Shizuku shifts through the application letters and notices a letter addressed to Alan. She hands him the letter, which appears to be an investigation request for a dungeon that was reportedly dormant for years. However, recent reports have surfaced that this dungeon has been accumulating an immense amount of magical power. Shizuku recalls that this dungeon was all the rage several years ago, after rumors spread of a demon lord residing inside it. When Alan exclaims that the reward money is a staggering 500,000 gold, Shizuku says they'd be stupid not to accept it. A few days have passed since Dorothy joined the ranks of dystopia, and her little study room is being filled up rather nicely. She suddenly warns Licht that the humans have become aware of their dungeon, and when he asks her how she knows this, she explains that she ordered one of her spirits to patrol the outskirts of dystopia. Humans were spotted nearby, and they were definitely aware of their dungeon's existence. Licht suggests that they cross that bridge when it comes to it. More importantly, he tells her that Faris and the other high-ranking demons are grateful for Dorothy's guardian spirits. She is happy to be of help. In her past life, she found little application for her necromancy abilities, so she is delighted to finally be of use to someone. Arya suddenly enters the room, and Dorothy politely bows her head in reverence. This is apparently their first time meeting, but Arya has already heard a lot of Dorothy's work, and she tells her to keep it up. Licht warns Arya that humans were spotted nearby, and it is extremely likely that they will be surrounded and attacked. Arya cracks her knuckles. Perfect. They can attack in all directions. However, she remarks that Rose and Iris alone will be enough to defeat them all. Licht asks more about their battle power, and Arya explains that while Iris is only strong while with Tiss, Rose is an extremely formidable foe alone, and will likely destroy anything that so much as looks at her funny. Dorothy asks Licht if it would be possible for Rose to spare some adventurers and let them slip by. She knows the painful feeling of being slaughtered by a vampire all too well, and she pities anyone who has to endure the same fate. Arya retires to her chambers for now, citing that she's busy doing something else. Licht watches Arya leave, and he can't shake the feeling that there's something wrong with her. Dorothy commends Licht for being able to talk to Arya normally, pointing out that anyone else would have succumbed to the pressure of speaking to a truly great demon lord. Meanwhile, Alan, Joss, and Shizuku travel by carriage toward dystopia. Joss is rather concerned with how little information they have to go on, and he fears that they didn't prepare enough for such a dangerous incursion. Alan tells him to calm down since it's too late to come up with any countermeasures. Shizuku echoes this sentiment and complains that using her brain is too exhausting. Joss has a bad feeling about this. They begin discussing how to split up the 500,000 gold reward amongst each other, and Shizuku says that she can't accept their healer accepting a cut. They eventually arrive at the narrow staircase leading to dystopia. It reeks of death, and Alan warns them not to die since they no longer have Licht with them. However, he does have an escape item to use in a pinch. The four of them descend into the bowls of dystopia, and soon enough, Joss senses what seem to be spirits, and even worse, a Licht up ahead. Alan seems disturbed by this revelation, so he changes their battle strategy. They're going to hit them hard and fast before the battle drags on. Their plan is one swift strike. Licht, oblivious to the impending attack, continues helping Dorothy clean up her workshop. She thanks him for all the help he's been, since her spirits can't exactly help. All they're good for is haunting houses, scouting, and attacking enemies. Speaking of which, Licht earlier recalled that one of her spirits spotted some humans nearby, but nothing of note has happened since then. Dorothy tells him that something of note has happened. Humans have entered dystopia. Licht's brain takes a moment to process this information. Meanwhile, Alan's party enters the first main hall of the dungeon, which is swarming with Dorothy's spirits. They seem shocked that all of these ghosts are being controlled by a single Licht, but Joss notes that, with how many spirits there are, it might be the work of 10 Lichtas. Alan is in disbelief that they're facing such numbers, but he steels his resolve, urges his party to stick together and not act alone. Suddenly, Rose appears behind him. She is under orders to split up his group, and she apologizes for separating him. Alan glances around the room and realizes that she is telling the truth. He really is alone with her. Rose introduces herself, and Alan makes the mistaken assumption that she is the dungeon master. Rose seems rather confused by his deduction as well, but what she does know is that she is his opponent. Without hesitation, Alan draws his sword and attacks Rose, but the attack is painfully slow and obvious, and Rose snatches it right from his hand. She carefully caresses the blade and admires its craftsmanship, but she feels that it is a waste on him. She returns the blade to him, and he nearly trips over himself trying to catch it. He demands to know who is controlling the spirits wandering out in the halls, and she remarks that their master is with Licht. Alan reacts with shock, which Rose notices. She puts two and two together, and she realizes that Alan was Licht's former party member. Alan wonders if Licht somehow survived, but shrugs off such a ridiculous notion. Alan maintains his bravado, and Rose lets out an exasperated sigh. She finally understands why Licht dumped them. Two bats suddenly appear and bite Alan's hand. He tries to shake them off, but it is already too late. He feels his body growing numb, and Rose laments that she won't get much blood out of him due to his physique. She then gets a devilish idea. What if she asked Licht to revive him over and over again, which would potentially give her an infinite source of blood? Yes, that seems like the perfect infinite blood glitch. Rose decides to test this theory out. Alan glances up, and he freezes in place. Seconds later, a whole swarm of bats latch onto his entire body, turning him into a human bat blood buffet. Meanwhile, Shizuku steps into what appears to be a woodland forest, a domain we are familiar with, but it is completely alien to her. She is still confused about what happened to the others. She eventually encounters Tis and Iris, the sisters in charge of the grove. Shizuku draws her blade and tries to intimidate them into leaving, not knowing just what she's walking into. Tis and Iris look at each other funny and find it amusing that Shizuku doesn't seem to know her place. Iris stretches out her hand toward the invader and sends a few sprites in her direction. In response, Shizuku lashes out with a slash as galore to cut them down. Though she manages to kill quite a few of the sprites, she suddenly yelps out in pain as one of them manages to slip through and enter her arm. She suddenly drops her sword, unable to move an inch. Iris is pleased with herself for succeeding in subjugating Shizuku, and she looks to Tis for praise and head pats. It is Tis's turn to bat, and she commands even more spirits to enter Shizuku, effectively taking control of her entire body. Shizuku's body jerks uncontrollably as she realizes that her entire body has been taken over. Tis and Iris discuss amongst themselves what they should do with Shizuku, and they get the bright idea of handing her over to Rose. Meanwhile, Joss and the team's unconscious priest find themselves in a small room filled with spirits. Dorothy steps forward, and Josh recognizes her somewhat. But it isn't possible for the great necromancer to be alive. After all, she should already be dead. Joss knows without asking that Dorothy is unwilling to answer any of his questions. She nods, and she raises her staff against Joss. It's nothing personal, just business. Joss draws his twin daggers and prepares for battle, but Licht suddenly returns. Joss's eyes go wide, and they have quite the unlikely reunion. Joss asks Licht how he ended up in this dungeon, but Licht could ask him the very same question. To Joss's knowledge, Licht should have been executed by now, but Licht explains that he was brought back to life. Since Joss is here, Licht knows that Alan must be here too. He'd love to have a word with his former leader, but Joss has no idea where he is either. In the first place, it was Licht's plan to separate them. Licht breathes a sigh of relief mixed with a tinge of exhaustion, and he asks Joss if he knew the whole truth behind the execution order. Joss stays silent for a moment, but he openly admits that he did. When Licht asks him what his reaction was to it, Joss replies that he knew their party wouldn't be as strong as before. Licht accepts this answer. Joss goes on and asks him how he ended up in this dungeon, and Licht reiterates that he was revived by the power of his own skill, and now he uses his abilities for the benefit of the Demon King's army. Joss exclaims that this will cause Licht to forever become a villain in the annals of human history. And when the king learns of this, a force will surely be sent out to crush dystopia. Licht is aware of all this, and he simply tells Joss to bring it on. Realizing that there is no more reasoning with Licht, Joss plots to escape using the teleport item he is secretly clutching in his hands. The kingdom must know, at all costs, what is transpiring here. Before he can act, Dorothy's spirits lunge at Joss, but he has enough time to toss his teleportation item. When the smoke clears, he is gone. However, due to an interference spell permeating throughout the dungeon, Joss is only teleported somewhere else, even though he wanted to go back to the entrance. Strangely, he notices that there isn't a single undead monster in sight, which is highly unusual. He has the misfortune of running into Ferris, whom he believes is a non-combatant or a slave. He teleports behind her and quickly cuts her at every single vital spot, not knowing that it would lead to his own death. Mere seconds later, Joss dies, marking the complete defeat of Alan's party. The king of the Rasaga kingdom is informed of their loss of contact, and he is deeply troubled by the news. He is now concerned with whether or not the monsters inside the dungeon are their enemies or an angry neutral party. If they are enemies, then a battle is inevitable. His advisor suggests that they share this new information with the other races near the dungeon, such as the elves or the dragonkin. The king believes that this is for the best because before long, this dungeon will become everyone's problem. Therefore, he orders at once for preparations to begin and another investigation team to be sent in force. Meanwhile, back in Dystopia, Arya seems to be greatly troubled. Licht asks her what the problem is, and she complains that they've been eating the same thing for the past few days. Licht realizes that they have been, though it's not like they're sick of it. In addition, Tis is the only decent cook. Neither Licht nor Arya are any good. Arya comes up with a plan that will solve all their problems, and for the record, Licht has to ask if he has to resurrect any dead chefs. Arya clears her throat and announces her plan to team up with other non-humans, and she hopes to recruit some of their chefs into their ranks and secure a source of good food. She is confident that, with the abundance of treasure at their disposal, she can find someone willing to help. She hopes to enlist the aid of the dragonkin for their prize smiths, and the elves for their good food and chefs. Arya sports an evil laugh, not knowing that the king of Versaga is also making his move. Licht immediately heads to Tis and Iris's domain. He recounts his conversation with Arya, and since Licht plans to go to the Elven Kingdom first, he'll appreciate the Elven sisters' help. While the sisters consider the request, Licht goes over his plan. Since they'll be dealing with elves, the sisters will be a big help since they're both high elves. High elves are considered to be superior to other elves. Even if they don't cooperate with Licht, at the very least, having the Elven sisters with them will make the conversation move along easier. To help the Elven sisters decide, Licht points out how recruiting chefs will fill Dystopia's canteen with extravagant meals. Tis is sure everyone will jump for joy if the number of chefs in the dungeon increases, but hearing that only makes Iris pout. Why couldn't they just have her cook for everyone? Iris, honey, it's because your cooking isn't edible. They can't let you cook. But of course, Tis soothes her sister by saying Iris's cooking is unique. With that, the Elven sisters are more than happy to follow Licht to the Elven kingdoms. But first, Introductions are in order because he has yet to meet their cute pet, Fen-chan. And by that, they mean the legendary beast Fenrir. It's a miracle Licht didn't faint at the sight of him. Just look at Fen-chan's ferocious elegance. Frankly speaking, Licht believes the presence of this legendary beast alone might be more than enough to hold sway over the entire elven kingdom. His silence prompts Tis to assure him Fen-chan's well-trained and disciplined, so he won't suddenly attack. Though Licht says he's not afraid of the creature, the shakiness in his voice gives him away. Tis has heard that a Fenrir that's tasted humans before is exceptionally dangerous. And hearing that she can't recall whether Fen-chan is or isn't like that does nothing to calm Licht's nerves. In any case, Tis doesn't think there'll be a problem since Licht can just revive himself. But the healer would love to be assured the elven sisters won't let their pet have its way with him. He doesn't want to be bitten or torn to shreds, thank you very much. Tis assures Licht he has nothing to worry about. Fenrir will end his life quickly enough for him not to feel any pain. Good thing Iris is quick to tell the healer her sister's only teasing him. They all hop on the legendary beast, and Licht admits this is a breathtaking experience. If only Tis could quit messing with him. Don't ride Fen-chan when he's hungry or he'll get angry, she says. Licht can only hope the elven sisters will never forget to feed Fen-chan whenever they need to ride him. They soon reach the forest near the elven kingdom, thanks to Fenrir. Staying in dystopia is good and all, but as she breathes in the delicious air, Tis thinks it may not be bad to go to the outside world occasionally. As for Iris, she wishes they could have brought Fen-chan with them. They left the legendary beast somewhere close since they agreed having him with them would frighten the elves, and Licht thinks that with Fenrir's appearance, it wouldn't be strange if people mistook him for an invader. A rustling nearby makes Tis stop. Licht doesn't hear anything, but Iris does. Someone screaming for help, and the enemy is likely a giant spider. Licht supposes the one in danger is an elf. He can't think of anyone but elves who'd get attacked in the middle of a forest like this. Tis confirms Licht's guess. Unfortunately, once giant spiders have located their prey, escape is impossible. Still, Iris believes they can help if they get there fast enough. And run fast they do. Though Licht lags behind the elven sisters, he does his best to keep up. He asks Tis if she thinks they can beat the monster. The elder elf looks at him with a smile. Whether it's a giant spider or a fierce beast, as long as they stop it from moving, the fight is theirs to win. They arrive just in time to see the giant spider's pincer-like fangs leave the girl's head. She's already dead. The spider soon notices its guests, but before it can attack, the elven sisters launch their synchronized defense, sprite control, and spirit control. Fairy-like creatures invade the giant spider's body, and the arachnid explodes moments later. Tis turns to Licht, pleading with him to resurrect the little girl. He gets to it, and it doesn't take long for the girl to open her lively eyes. She's bewildered at being alive, even more so when she sees the giant dead spider. But Tis is quick to soothe her worries. They defeated the spider. It's no longer a threat to her. After a few moments, the girl calms down and asks if they're the ones who resurrected her. Tis gives all the credit for that to Licht. The little elf immediately bows and smacks her forehead to the ground to thank the healer. She only lifts her head after hearing Iris say she could be their guide. Licht explains how they're unsure of many things on their journey to the Elven Kingdom, so they'd appreciate it if the little elf could help. In that case, leave it to Lyrica. She wants to be of help to her saviors. Licht thanks her and introduces himself. Upon hearing the Elven sisters are high elves, Lyrica's full-on fangirling. No wonder they're so beautiful. It's her first time meeting high elves, so you can't blame her for being giddy. Their group soon reaches the heart of the Elven Kingdom, a bustling city filled with buildings carved into century-old towering trees. While waiting for Lyrica, Licht and the Elven sisters rest underneath the canopy of the majestic forest. Iris can't help but be amazed by the kingdom. Everyone here is surrounded by a forest and can bask in the warm sunlight. Tis concurs. If this is the environment she gets to enjoy, she wouldn't mind coming to this kingdom over and over again. Even Licht agrees with the Elven sisters. They're so relaxed that they don't notice the many eyes looking their way. When Lyrica arrives with urgent news, her saviors answer languidly. But she effectively gets their attention once she tells them the princess wants to meet and talk to them all. Licht didn't expect everything to go so smoothly. Lyrica points to the tallest treehouse in the forest. That's where the princess is waiting for them. It's unlikely for them to get lost on their way there, but Lyrica's more than happy to accompany them. Iris's eyes shine at the sight of the big treehouse. She'd love to have a tree that big in dystopia. Tis agrees and believes they can forward a request to Rose, but Licht immediately urges them to discard the idea. If the vampire's workload increases any further, she'll have a mental breakdown. Jokes aside, Tis reminds Iris she must behave before the princess. Licht has to see if she understands by asking who's more respectable between Tis and the princess. But of course, Iris picks her elder sister. Oh boy, this needs some work. Before they enter the throne room, Licht spends some time teaching Iris proper etiquette. His hard work pays off as the young high elf is now the picture of elegance, and Tis makes sure to give her little sister the praise she deserves. Now that they're ready, Lyrica opens the door. Iris does wonder what will happen if the princess doesn't like them. Tis supposes Mausama might sulk if that happens. She'll spend a long time cooped up in her area. Licht breathes deeply. Considering the risks they'll face if the negotiation fails, they must succeed at all costs. The doors open to reveal a spacious room carrying a delicate refinement. At the far end, the princess sits with her head bowed low. Princess Arshi looks up and smiles gently as she humbly welcomes the guests to their kingdom. After hearing Lyrica's report, the princess apologizes for not expressing her gratitude sooner. Though Licht says there's no need for that, Princess Arshi wishes to know how to repay the favor. The giant spider has been causing distress and havoc to the Elven Kingdom for a while. The residents were at wit's end, trying to find a way to handle it. But thanks to these guests, they no longer need to worry. Having thanked everyone, Princess Arshi turns to Licht, as she understands he has an important matter he'd like to discuss. Before he can speak, Iris takes charge of the negotiation. She states they're hoping to borrow some of the finest capable individuals of the kingdom in exchange for the jewelry and weapons they possess. It looks like Licht taught the young high elf a little too well. Thankfully for them, Princess Arshi is lighthearted, taking no offense for Iris speaking out of turn. She even jokingly says their weakness is jewelry. But in all seriousness, many of their people have expressed their desire to explore the world outside the Elven Kingdom. If it's temporary employment, Princess Arshi believes many would gladly apply for it. Licht is glad to hear this, but Tis reminds him the agreement shouldn't be unilateral. There must be something they can offer to the Elven Kingdom. In that case, Princess Arshi requests them to exterminate all the hostile outsiders like the giant spider. This will greatly help them since their kingdom is not fond of violence. And that sounds perfect for Licht, considering how their demon lord's been itching for a fight. With that, the agreement is fixed. Princess Arshi will send some of the elves to dystopia promptly. They're all good kids, so they won't have to worry about anything. The princess also asks Licht and the elven sisters to send her sincere gratitude and regards to Ma Osama. With the deal settled, they go to where Fenrir's waiting. As they do, Tis wonders how the princess knows Ma Osama. She doesn't remember any of them mentioning the demon lord. Oh well, whatever. The important thing is that they've secured the deal with the elves. Next is the dragonkin. Two figures fly swiftly above a barren land. Holding an umbrella, Rose sighs contentedly at having this chance to go outside. She feels super refreshed. Licht agrees it's refreshing, which is why he thinks Rose should take a break from her work once in a while. Licht planned to head into the Dragonkin village alone, but Rose hastily volunteered to go with him. Only a couple of days ago, the workaholic vampire finished her work quickly, so she could accompany the healer. Licht does get the feeling Rose coming with is less of a break and more of a result of her being restless when she isn't doing anything productive. Still, the healer never thought he'd see the day he'd be flying through the sky. It's all thanks to Rose's cute bat friends. As for her and Sunlight, the days when it was her weakness are long gone. While they're still far from their destination, Rose asks what their first course of action should be once they reach the Dragonkin village. For example, how should they react if they get ambushed by the villagers? Licht believes they can't retaliate if an ambush happens. So yes, they can't attack the villagers, even if it's self-defense. They want the Dragonkin to manufacture armor and weapons for dystopia. It'd be in their best interest to get along with them, or so Arya told Licht. Since dystopia has only been resurrected recently, it has yet to be equipped with facilities for producing armor and weapons. As long as they develop a friendly relationship with the Dragonkin, they could commission them for metalworking projects. And that's regardless of whether they'll want to stay in dystopia. Licht had to ask Arya to lend him her cherished weapon to capture the Dragonkin's attention. He sure hopes this works. Rose calls Licht's attention as the village is in sight. She warns him to hang tight before holding him by the waist and managing their smooth landing. Well, more so for Rose, but not as much for Licht. He looks just about ready to hurl. Near the village, a pair of dragonkin siblings catch fish from a lake. But Lalka, the elder of the two, senses something bad approaching. Cain turns to his sister, wondering why she froze. Whatever Lalka felt, it's gone. But it's enough to convince her they should call it a day. Cain doesn't question it. They do have to return early since their mother is still in critical condition. After securing their catch, the dragonkin siblings make the trek back home. Lalka can't help but feel sapped of hope about their mother. Though Cain reminds her not to show signs of weakness, she struggles to be optimistic. Their mother has been eating less and less for the past few days. Lalka thinks it might be time they call someone who can use healing magic. But Cain begs to disagree. It'll probably be pointless. Plenty of magic spells heal wounds, but he's never heard of ones that cure illnesses. Lalka sees his point. For now, they can only hurry back home and hope their mother has gotten better. Meanwhile, Licht and Rose are almost at the Dragonkin village. Village seems more fitting than kingdom, since they appear to live in a smaller number compared to humans. This astute observation is Licht's first thought after seeing the village. Rose, on the other hand, is considering whether they should raid them. Chill girl. Licht would rather initiate a conversation with any dragonkin they can find. The best case scenario is they find a lone dragonkin because the chance of them listening will be high. In the case of 2 or more dragonkin, they'll likely immediately jump into battle, no questions asked. Rose beams as she spots 2 young-looking dragonkin. Licht observes they don't seem to be carrying weapons, and there aren't any other dragonkin around, so they'll have to make do with talking to the pair. Upon being greeted by strangers, Lalka instantly shields her brother. She recognizes the man as human while the woman is not. She detects an ominous presence from her. Cain sets down their catch before confronting the strangers. After all, this place isn't for the likes of them. Licht swiftly explains they only came here to barter. The dragonkin says humans have nothing worth their time, but the sword Licht presents beg to differ. Lalka and Cain whisper to each other. A human possessing such a great weapon might have medicine to cure their mother. It sounds too optimistic, but it's still worth asking. Unfortunately, Licht doesn't have any with him. And of all things to bring, Rose chose garlic. What kind of vampire carries garlic with them? But Licht does wonder why they're asking for medicine. Cain doesn't hesitate to explain that their mother is bedridden. They need the medicine to cure her, so they'll prefer if the humans return to barter once they have the treatment. But as luck would have it, Licht has just the skill that might help cure the dragonkin's sibling's mother. He uses resurrection on their catch to prove it. The light of life returns to the fish's eyes, as does hope in Lalka's heart. This human might just be their mother's savior. They reach the dragonkin's siblings' home, where 3 other dragonkin watch over their mother. Their surprise is immediate upon seeing the humans with Lalka and Cain, but Lalka's quick to vouch for them as people who might be able to cure their mother. Before that, Licht needs to check the mother's condition. Rose follows, wondering what seems to be troubling him. For Licht to use resurrection, the target needs to die first, and he's having trouble finding a way to do that while watchful eyes surround him. If Licht does anything conspicuous, the dragonkin might attack him. On the other hand, he might gain their trust if the treatment is successful. It's a good thing he has Rose with him, because she swiftly comes up with something creative, for lack of a better term. With no other explanation, the vampire bites the mother's neck. Licht bluffs to save their skin. Oh, she's just checking her pulse. The treatment method varies based on the pulse rate, so this is an important step. Licht's heart is racing. Thankfully, the dragonkin believes him and even apologizes for interrupting. A moment passes before Rose tells him she's done. Licht hovers his hand over the woman and casts resurrection. The woman's eyes slowly open before she sits up. All the pain in her body has disappeared. Crying unabashedly, the dragonkin's siblings rush to hug their mother, and through her tears of joy, Lalka says Licht cured her. With her tears still falling, the mother thanks Licht and Rose. Dragonkin always repay their favors twice over. Such is the conviction of the race, so whatever her saviors ask for, they'll be sure to deliver. And that's Licht's chance. He explains they need to have weapons and armor manufactured. The dragonkin's special skills will be invaluable for this task. Is that all? That task is nothing but child's play for the dragonkin. But Cain knows it won't be that simple considering the weapon Licht brought with him. Still, though it'll be busy around their home from now on, the dragonkin's siblings are more than happy to repay the favor. Just like that, Licht has built a solid and trusting alliance with the Dragonkin. Having formed a pact with them and the elves, Dystopia can engage in a much wider range of activities. On top of that, they can easily organize an army in case of a crisis. Some days later, the night is quiet as usual in Dystopia, until a loud explosion rocks the dungeon to its very core. Morning comes, and Licht is none the wiser of what happened. He's enjoying casual chatter with Dorothy while conducting regular inspections. They both can't believe Licht's luck in establishing a good relationship with the Dragonkin. Still, Dorothy has observed Mosama's been keen on the outside world lately. She can't help but wonder if she intends to dominate the world. Licht doesn't have the faintest idea, but he heard something dreadful happened 100 years ago. So maybe the Demon Lord learned her lesson. Dorothy did hear something about that, though she also knows it's taboo to ask Mosama about it. Licht learned about that the hard way. He tried to ask the other day, but Arya got mad and shut herself in her room afterward. Whatever happened, the Demon Lord doesn't want to speak to them about it. Licht thinks perhaps the event 100 years ago is what's influencing Arya to increase Dystopia's military power. At least he'd like to think Arya's not planning to dominate the world. Speaking of domination, Dorothy doubts they can match humans in terms of military might. Humans have them beaten by sheer number alone. On top of that, Licht has heard stories of the king having a trump card up his sleeve, though it's purely a rumor. No one knows exactly what it is, which makes its probable existence worrisome. Licht reported it to Arya, so she'll likely devise a countermeasure. While Licht and Dorothy are deep in conversation, Rosie passes by and greets them. She does wonder if it's all right for them to take their sweet time when Mosama summoned them for a meeting. The vampire's urgency has Licht worried. What happened? Still perfectly composed, Rosie informs them that the Demon Lord governing the East has instigated a fight against Dystopia. Ferris and the Elven sisters are already present when they reach Arya's throne room. Though everyone expected to attend this meeting has arrived, the Demon Lord still doesn't speak. It takes Ferris saying they're worried about her for Mosama to finally talk. Arya thought the demons should join forces to fight against their common enemy, the humans. As such, she tried to talk to the so-called Demon Lord of the East about it. And guess how they replied? Yeah, that explosion last night? That was their doing. Arya would be okay if they just ignored her proposal. Instead, they hurled a magic attack against Dystopia to harass them. Of course, since Licht was so soundly asleep, he had no idea about the explosion in the night. The attack damaged nothing in particular. However, if the Demon Lord of the East wants to pick a fight, they'll just have to give them a fight. Licht is swift to bring some common sense into the discussion. Dystopia's military force isn't anywhere near functional, so he thinks they should wait a little longer before declaring war on anyone. But Arya will not be swayed. They launched a magic attack against Dystopia. She will not let their insolence go unpunished. Dorothy turns to Licht. It looks like they've got a situation on their hands. On top of the impending attack humans will launch, they've got to handle this fight with the Demon Lord of the East. The rumors Licht has heard about the Demon Lord does nothing to soothe his worries. It is said none has ever returned alive after fighting him. If Licht remembers correctly, his name is Garga. He's so dangerous that the guild warns everyone not to engage him in battle. And considering last night's explosion, Garga must possess monstrous magic power to blast them from his castle. Arya has no recollection of this Demon Lord. To begin with, the Demon Lord's throne had only ever been handed down to their children, but Arya doesn't know what happened to the throne after her death. She didn't leave any children to succeed her. The only good news is that Arya still knows where the Demon Lord's castle is. Worry spreads across Iris's face. Are they really going to fight? She just hates losing. But Tis is swift to allay her fears. They won't lose as long as Licht is by their side. Arya concurs. Licht has the most important role in this battle, so he better prepare to work his bum off. The role is simple, really. Arya will depend on Licht to resurrect the girls immediately when they fall while in combat. Notably, Faris. The healer is more than willing to do his best, and sweet little Faris couldn't hope for a better partner than him. After the emergency meeting, the gang, Sans, Mao, Osama, convene in another room. Devising a plan is optional, or so Arya says, and it doesn't seem time is on their side. If possible, Licht will want to attack tomorrow to gain the upper hand. Garga may only rule over the East, but he's still a Demon Lord. He'll surely have a lot of manipulative techniques up his sleeve. Then he also has a small number of top brass demons they must consider. While Licht's deep in thought, Rose speaks up. She doesn't mind leading a suicide attack if it will benefit their team, but Licht doesn't think they need to go that far. Putting aside Rose's idea for a moment, Dorothy believes fighting head-on will be too much with only 7 of them in the team. If Licht is all right spreading dystopia thin, she can use some of her spirits to fight alongside them. And the healer does believe that's a good call. As for the Elven sisters, they can send their sprites together with Dorothy's spirits. All that's left is Rose. They're stuck when it comes to thinking about what she can do. Her idea is just too risky to pull off. Iris suggests she uses her womanly appeal to charm the enemy, but Licht immediately vetoes that. Ferris does remember Rose can transform herself into a colony of bats. Though the vampire doubts it'd be useful, Licht's starting to form an idea. He has her demonstrate the skill, and that's when it hits him. Rose can take an infiltration role, but her enthusiasm is way out of hand. She can't just go toe-to-toe with the Demon Lord. Though dystopia is filled with skilled and formidable monsters and humans, going into war with the Demon Lord of the East might be pushing it. Perhaps this will be the true test of their bond, and just how strong of a healer Licht truly is.